My memories of the Mounds have been covered in a thick haze. It's a good thing I wrote down everything that I could while it was still fresh. Now my visit feels more like a surreal nightmare than something I experienced myself. At first, it was small details that went missing, like the shape of those flower petals that shielded me from those traveling along the road. Then, after a while, bigger things started to fade away. For example, I'd almost completely forgotten about that funeral procession I'd witnessed, as well as the corpses hanging on the tree. But how could I forget about either of those events? Those are the types of things that should stick with you. That being said, there are some aspects of my misadventure that are still vivid. My encounter with the White Son of Mist is one of them. It may sound like I'm speaking out of paranoia when I say this, but I don't think Gwyn would allow me to forget a single detail of my interaction with him. The other thing I can't get out of my head is that snake, which has begun to slither about in my dreams, grinding me and my loved ones up from between its scales, like a living meat processor until we're all jumbled together, unable to discern whose pieces belong to who. I'm only human. So, in that regard, maybe it would be better if I let the memories fade as much as I can. It's not unheard of for those who are fortunate enough to survive the Mounds to lose all traces of their sanity after all. For my own well-being, I'm not going to fight to keep what I encountered down there in the forefront of my mind. The silver lining is that Orion has an official record of the other world. Going forward, the plan is to distribute my testimony to the other specialty pest control companies that we have contact with, simply because we think that information may be helpful. However, looking back, the post reads like the ramblings of a mad woman. I wouldn't blame anyone for not taking it seriously. After all of that, I found myself longing for my sword. It's funny. I'd seen it as burdensome when it was first given to me. Now I feel vulnerable without it. Not having its weight at my hip actually fills me with a flutter of panic, as if I'd lost a limb. Is that strange? Is it weird to become so attached to a weapon of all things? Some good news is that the banjo bastard did not waste any time fixing it up and returning it to me not too long after I was recovered from that place. For a multitude of reasons, I made sure to show up to my first training session back with a couple of offerings. One of those reasons was to thank him for repairing Ratcatcher. However, my primary motive was to reward him for not only volunteering to lead me out of the Mounds, but also because he managed to refrain from being openly hostile towards Deedra for once. Maybe some positive reinforcement will Pavlov a conscience into him. As such, I arrived with a bottle of wine and a reindeer skull that I'd procured from an oddities store a few towns over. I even went the extra mile and made the skull festive by taping a round red ornament to where the animal's nose would have been. On the surface, the reindeer skull may appear to be a strange choice for a gift, but if his cabin is anything to go off of, the mechanic's preferred interior design styles seems to be a mixture of mid-century vintage and vulture culture, best described as Ed Geincore. Bet that aesthetic won't trend online anytime soon. While I ventured through the winter, there was what sounded like the groans of a deer. As of writing this, it's rutting season, and bucks are known to call out while searching for does to mate with. If you aren't familiar with what their vocalizations sound like, they can be a bit unnerving to hear. It can best be described as a deep gurgling grunt or a belch. If you ever hear something like that in the woods, more than likely it's just a horny buck trying to shoot his shot, rather than anything atypical. However, this eligible bachelor sounded more high-pitched than usual. Not wanting to find trouble or risk pissing off the mechanic by being late, I pushed it to the back of my mind for the time being. Thankfully, the mechanic seemed to get a kick out of his gifts, snickering, "You went and killed yourself, Rudolph. Ought to be ashamed of yourself ruining Christmas like this." "Santa can get headlights like a normal person," I replied mildly. "That's for leading me out of the Mounds. The wine's for the sword repair. Are they acceptable?" He pulled the fake Rudolph nose off, examining the skull's teeth as he commented, "This your way of trying to keep yourself out of debt?" I was afraid he'd say something like that. "They're tokens of my appreciation," I assured him before adding, And if we're trying to build goodwill between our organizations, one of us indebting the other would definitely not be the way to do it. He set the skull down gingerly, taking more care of those bones than he ever would a living thing before smirking at me. "Don't worry, Fiona, I'm just fucking with you." Prick. Before I could say anything, Iolo had produced Ratcatcher. This may sound odd, but tears pricked in my eyes when I saw that its blade had been repaired. When I accepted the sword from him, I felt the same aching relief that is normally reserved for finding out that a loved one had made a miraculous recovery after a bad accident. Don't ask me to explain why I reacted so strongly. I can't either. Maybe I'm losing my mind despite my best efforts. All I can say is that it's nice not to feel naked anymore. While I slid Ratcatcher back into its rightful place on my belt, Iolo began poking at the fire he'd started before I got there, trying to build it large enough to keep the clearing somewhat tolerable to be in on that frigid night. With it getting colder, training has been even more unpleasant than usual. There are times where it feels like Ratcatcher's hilt will be permanently frozen to my palm, or like the joints in my hand will seize and simply stop moving altogether, even while wearing gloves. The fire helps, but with how low temperatures have been getting and how bitter that wind is, it only goes so far. While searching through the contents of his coat's pockets, of all things, he pulled out a spindle of thread with a needle stuck into its top. That was unexpected. Maybe he has some hobbies besides maiming, music, and murder. Thinking that I was being funny, I commented, "You're a grandma, you know that." He narrowed his eyes at me. "Come again." "Sewing, old-timey music, being impatient with young people," I explained, watching as his exasperation grew with each word I spoke. "Bonus points if you store the thread in an old cookie tin. Just need some grandkids, and the transformation will be complete." Abruptly, the annoyance gave way to mischief as the corner of the bastard's mouth lifted. "You offering to help me start that process, Fiona?" Maybe I should have spared myself the discomfort and embarrassment by dying in the Mounds. "I have no interest in being your granddaughter," I said flatly, preferring to play dumb rather than engage with the true meaning behind his words. Judging by the way he guffawed after my response, it wasn't a genuine pass at me. His motive, most likely, had been the same thing as it always was, wanting to get under my skin. Even so, I fought the urge to punch him when he winked at me. "Suit yourself." While he fed more kindling into the fire pit, Iolo casually asked me what I remembered about my time in the Mounds. I pretty much told him the exact same thing I told Yins at the beginning of this update. No use repeating the same information twice. After I was done giving my fractured recollection, I mused, "I can't believe I was really gone for 3 days." "Believe it," he replied, staring into the flames, his expression unreadable. "Would have been longer if your friend hadn't gotten me." Something I'd forgotten to mention in my last update was that Deedra had sought Iolo out when Vic couldn't get anything out of the replacement himself. In my defense, I was still trying to process everything I'd seen and was focused primarily on writing out as much as I could before I lost everything. It had simply slipped my mind. Regardless, even though this wasn't new information for me, it still was jarring to hear it come from him. "Do I want to know what you did to the imposter?" I asked cautiously. Iolo's smile told me that I probably made a mistake by inquiring about it. He simply said, "Listen." Dread crawled from my gut and up into my throat as it dawned on me that the grunts I'd mentioned earlier and had been hearing consistently since I entered the woods weren't from a deer after all. The replacement was still alive. "I'll let it die when it's been 3 days," Iolo informed me, his voice even colder than the 8-degree wind chill we were standing in. "Only fair, since that's how long you were down there." For reference, when I had this conversation with the mechanic, only 2 days had passed since my rescue. I don't know what he did to the replacement to make it sound like that, and I wasn't masochistic enough to go looking for it or to question him any further. There was the chance it was still wearing my face. After what I'd been through, I didn't think my PTSD could handle seeing a copy of myself mutilated like that, despite knowing that it had callously left me in the Mounds for dead. Seemingly out of the blue, he casually changed the subject as he told me, "Still don't like that Keening woman. Too condescending for my liking, and that way fact drives me up the fucking wall. But after this, I'll admit that I find her slightly less insufferable than I did before." I stared at him in disbelief, wondering if I'd somehow misheard him. That was an astonishing statement coming from him. It was damn near close to a compliment, an extremely backhanded one granted, but it was still in the ballpark of being favorable. "Careful, mechanic. You keep talking, and you might make the mistake of saying something that could be misconstrued as nice," I quipped as I did my best to ignore the ongoing sounds of the not Nessa's anguish. He snorted, shaking his head at me. "All right, we best get started. For one, it's colder than the 9th circle of hell out here. For another, you're about to get on my nerves." "No Briar or Houndmaster?" I questioned. Iolo gave me a smile. "Nope. Mother said I was fit to fly again. Why, you ain't missing 'em, are you?" Not the thorny boy. Maybe I was a little too honest. "I'll decide that when I see how well you're moving." At that, the grin turned devious. "Well, maybe this'll help you make up your mind. No Clover. You're going to be dealing with the illusion tonight." "Is that because of the changeling?" I asked apprehensively. "Nope, just couldn't find one." Iolo replied lightly, though his expression sobered. "But since you brought it up, I want you to tell me exactly how that lil shit got one over on you. Guessing those spores got to you." I nodded as I confirmed that there had been a fungal scent in the air that made me dizzy. Suddenly, an alarming thought occurred to me. "Hold on, you're not going to drug me, are you?" "Not this time," was his concerning answer. "But I do want to get you inoculated against them. Over time, you can build up resistance. That'll come later. For now, I want to see what you can do against something you ain't really seeing. It may sound hard to believe, but fighting Iolo when he's pretending to be human is a lot more challenging than dealing with the dragonfly. It's more difficult to gauge his reach, and along with that, he is a smaller target. Not being able to go for his wings also took away his most accessible weak spots. To top it off, the mechanic was moving a lot better than he had in a long time. The best I'd seen since the night the cookie hag tore his wings off. He still wasn't quite as quick and agile as he had been before the injury, but all in all, it seems like he's starting to get more used to his prosthetics. And, of course, he was being a total dick about it. Popping up behind me to tap on my shoulder, only to disappear again. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I waited, keeping Ratcatcher in front of my chest, its point facing up to the sky, knowing that he'd get bored of messing with me eventually. In the corner of my right eye there was movement, however I knew better, so I slashed towards my left instead. The mechanic blocked it with the wooden sword, snickering. "Not falling for that anymore. You're getting predictable," I spat out before pirouetting away from him, avoiding his retaliation. Unfortunately, he took that as a challenge. He had a dark look in his eye, staying on me, making me deflect blow after blow. I shouldn't have said anything. I couldn't let him keep pushing me. If I got cornered, he'd really give me trouble. Everywhere I went, he cut me off, not relenting or giving me any opportunities to get somewhere more fortuitous. If an opportunity wasn't going to present itself, I was going to have to make one. I parried him exactly like how the Houndmaster had taught me. Afterwards, I kicked him square in the chest. He fell back slightly, quickly regaining his senses before I could slash the sword across his torso. His laugh almost sounded genuine. "Getting better. You're starting to look like you know what you're doing." I knew what that edge in his voice meant. He was up to something. But what else is new? It's Iolo. I feigned high, then went low, fully prepared to deal with whatever bullshit he was going to throw at me. At least I thought I was prepared. However, when he parried my strike, he maneuvered his blade in a way that twisted my wrist and wrenched Ratcatcher from my grasp. Shit! I ducked away, trying to circle around him so that I could get the sword back. Without anything to block him with, I had no other option but to avoid him if I didn't want to get bludgeoned. He began herding me, not letting me anywhere near Ratcatcher. With how quick he is, he didn't give me any chances to get out of the path he was forcing me onto. My back hit a tree. The dull blade of the wooden sword touched my throat as the bastard smirked at me. How's that for predictable? While he was gloating, I kicked, aiming for his instep. He was on me in a second, inches away, the side of the blade pressing against me slightly harder than before. I'd expected him to be angry, but instead, he seemed to find this all funny. "You yield?" Iolo asked, grinning like the jagoff he is. This time, I tried kneeing him. He flinched, but didn't let me out from between him and the tree, shaking his head slowly at me as he snickered softly. For the duration of that training session, the replacement's grunts remained in the background of our sparring, but while pinned, I heard them as if they were right next to me. "So damn stubborn," Iolo remarked. "Pain in the ass is what you are." Silently promising that I'd nick him with the iron blade as revenge, I glared at him. I yield. Iolo stepped back, letting me pick my sword off the ground. With that, we were going again. And yes, I did graze him. Just on the hand, but even small victories count. When it comes to the inoculation talk, I'm not looking forward to whatever that process entails. After witnessing those seeds being planted in Iolo's back, I already knew that the neighbors had their own types of medical treatments. So the concept of otherworldly vaccinations wasn't too outlandish. But if it keeps more incidents like that from occurring, I'm willing to suck it up. Might even be something for my co-workers to look into, since I doubt I'm going to be the only employee to get exposed to such spores. On another subject, I do have a few major updates regarding Deedra. She has been experiencing some changes since she broke her curse. We discovered one of them during one of the rare, coveted slow days for Orion. Believe it or not, we do get those sometimes. Since we didn't have much better to do, the boss enlisted Deedra's help in fixing up the wound on his neck. Before she could get started on that, she first had to remove the clumsy stitches that he'd done himself. Despite trying to be as gentle as possible, I could see Victor gripping the arms of his desk chair with white knuckles. On one hand, slow days are nice. Gives us a chance to catch our breath, especially with the workload we've had over the past year. On the other hand, Raina and I both tend to get bored very quickly, and when that happens, the only way to resolve that is to annoy our co-workers about it. Considering that the boss was busy, Wes was our target this time. He was updating our computer records, head down diligently, as he trudged through reports with one hand propping his chin up. Raina smirked at me as if to say, "Watch this," then strode to his desk to loom over our colleague with a dead-eyed stare. Wes didn't acknowledge her at first. She simply continued staring at him, remaining completely motionless. Eventually, without looking up, he asked with his tone dripping in condescension, "May I help you?" Without a word, Raina reached forward and knocked over the cup that he used to hold pens on his desk, causing every writing utensil to cascade across his keyboard, then walked away. I bit my lip to keep from laughing as Wes's eyes slid up to glower at her. "Completely deadpan?" he asked. "Really?" Without glancing back at the vampire, Raina darted back to her own station. However, I knew her well enough to recognize that it was taking all of her willpower to keep from cracking up. Wes kept watching her like a hawk, shining eyes intense, waiting for her to break. She ended up having to lower her chair so that he couldn't see her sputtering like a balloon that had sprung a leak. Deidre, momentarily distracted by our antics, looked over to see what the fuss was about. As she did so, the needle slipped and she ended up pricking herself. To everyone's bewilderment, she flinched. As she stared at her bleeding finger in amazement, Victor questioned, "Did you feel that?" Still staring wide-eyed at the bead of blood on her fingertip, she stammered, It didn't hurt, but yes." I rushed over with one of my spare band-aids in hand as I asked with equal curiosity and concern, if it didn't hurt, then what did it feel like? While I gently dressed the small wound for her, she explained in wide-eyed shock, there was pressure, or perhaps a pull is the best way to describe it. I felt the needle tugging at my skin. Can you feel the band-aid? I asked, grimacing at her description before delicately cradling her hand in mine. Or that. I hope you can. Her brows furrowed as she shook her head. I'm afraid not. It was just the needle. It's something, Victor supplied, as the needle in question hung from the thread that was partially woven through his neck, swaying like a pendulum. You might regain more sensation over time. Makes sense it would start out small. Experimentally, Deedra pinched her forearm. I cringed when I saw her skin tent eventually turning stark white from her effort. Eventually, she let out a soft hum of disappointment, then released her arm. There was already a dark bruise forming. It must be extremes, she remarked, at least starting out. The pressure wasn't tangible until I used all of my strength. That made me frown. It seems cruel that the first thing that can get through is something that hurts you. She shrugged, her nonchalant answer making my heart break a bit. Even pain is preferable to nothing. With that, she went back to finishing up her Draga flesh quilt. That was a brand new sentence, by the way. Glad we all got to experience it together. Another noteworthy development in her condition came about while she was on a call with Raina. Once they returned, I was informed that Deedra had gotten some salt on her by accident when they were working on securing a house located by the crossroads that had been affected by some Snow People-related disturbances. Apparently, the salt only gave her hives, as opposed to the typical lesions that neighbors experience. As of right now, we're not sure if the end result of this transition will be that she'll become human, or if she's transforming into something else entirely. All that we can conclude at the moment is that Deedra is definitely not a weeper anymore, and as far as I or my co-workers are aware of, she is the only one of her kind to undergo this process. Deidre admitted the other day, I almost feel like a walking experiment. Naturally, that worried me. What makes you say that? I'm not necessarily saying that as a bad thing, Deidre assured me quickly, then took a deep breath before confessing, it's just a bit daunting to be the first, to not know what lies ahead. That made sense. A lot of sense. There were numerous terrifying unknowns that she was faced with, especially in regards to the way her body was being altered. I imagine it would be intimidating, I acknowledged gently. She then gave me a small smile as she said, at least I'm not alone through this. She wanted to be held then. I readily obliged, squeezing her tightly, savoring the scent of the rosy shampoo she's been favoring as I cradled her head against my chest. I've always found the smell of roses comforting. They remind me of Grandma's garden. As I embraced her, Deirdre's hands traced my back as if she were willing the nerves in her fingertips to break through the atrophy they've been held in for what had to have been centuries. After some time of basking in each other's presence, she raised her head, tilting her chin up to kiss me. I wish I could say that we had a fairy tale moment and that this kiss had magically granted her the ability to feel again, but sadly, this is real life. When we pulled apart, she whispered, I want to feel you so badly, more than anything. That makes two of us. Even something as innocent as holding hands brings me guilt for the simple fact that only one of us can indulge in it. It seems unjust that I can feel her warmth, yet she can't take in mine. On a more immediately distressing note, one of my worst fears in regards to work has been confirmed. There is hunger grass somewhere in town. We learned of it when a client called us in a panic. It was difficult to hear her over the sound of someone pounding on her door. She shrieked, He bit me, oh God, he bit me. Am I going to become like him? Oh God, what bit her? But identifying her attacker had to wait. The first thing that needed to happen was to make sure that whatever was after her couldn't reach her. Ma'am, the first thing you need to do is to place salt in a straight, uninterrupted line across the threshold of your door. That should stop him from coming in, I told her, balancing my tone between sounding authoritative enough that she'd feel compelled to listen to me, and remaining compassionate so that she'd know I was making an honest effort to help her. There was rustling from the other end of the phone as the assault on her door continued. "It's going to break the door down," the client sobbed shakily. "Not if you can get the salt there in time," I assured her urgently. "I know you're scared, but I need you to trust me, all right? It will work." To tell the truth, without knowing what was pursuing her, I couldn't be certain of that. However, the last thing the client needed in her situation was uncertainty. She needed to have faith that the salt would be enough to save her. The client yelped, but since I could still hear her heavy, shaking breath from the other line, I could be assured that she was still alive. Thankfully, the banging on her door sounded as if it had lightened up until it was gradually reduced to weakened knocks. Eventually, she calmed down enough to confirm to me that the salt line was in place. I let out a sigh of relief, thankful for possibly the millionth time in my life that salt is such a reliable tool. Then I asked her to recount what happened. The client had received a knock on her door. Since she'd been expecting a delivery for a Christmas gift that she'd been wanting to hide before her kids came home, she hurriedly opened it without question. Suffice to say, it wasn't a FedEx driver that she found on her doorstep. Instead, she found what appeared to be an emaciated man on her front porch, holding a clay bowl in one quivering hand. Shocked by his appearance, she asked him if he needed help, thinking at first that he must have been sick. All that her visitor had said before taking a chunk out of her arm was, "hungry." Luckily, she'd been able to push him off of her long enough to slam the door in his face, calling us soon after. "Oh God, he's talking to me again," she whimpered. Quickly I questioned, "What's he saying?" He keeps telling me he's hungry." This wasn't just any type of revenant. This was something that needed to be handled with the utmost delicacy. I'm not exaggerating when I say that a wrong move could have jeopardized not only our client's safety, but the overall well-being of our operating area. "Ma'am, this is going to sound strange, but do you happen to have any bread in the house?" She confirmed that she did, and I explained what she needed to do, and then she began to overthink. "Does it matter if it's multi-grain or Italian, or do you think he would prefer naan? I have tortillas." It doesn't matter," I told her. "As long as it's bread, he'll be satisfied." However, this time the client hesitated. When I patiently asked her what was the matter, she confessed to me fearfully yet honestly that she couldn't do it. For this, she apologized over and over. Waving Deedra over, I assured the client that it was okay, and that if she was willing to wait, I could go over there to offer her guests some bread on her behalf. While I set off to do that, Deidre stayed on the line with her, intending to keep her calm while I rushed to the client's address. During the drive, I hoped that the hungry man wouldn't mind that the bread I was offering him had peanut butter and jelly on it. According to our records, it shouldn't, but neighbors can be finicky. The last thing anyone needed was for him to become even more aggressive. If he didn't like it, I could potentially convince the client to hand me some bread out her window, if need be. When I pulled into the client's driveway, I saw why she'd initially felt sorry for him. The hungry man was gaunt, his green-grey skin stretched tightly over his frail, angular frame. His cheeks were hollow, his dark eyes seeming to be swallowed by the ridges of his skull. Tattered rags that had served as clothing at one point hung from his pointed shoulders, revealing the prominent curves of his ribs. Like the client had described, he clutched a stained clay bowl with spindly fingers. As that hand trembled, it fell from his grip, clattering to the porch without breaking, the sound like a gunshot. The hungry man's glittering eyes honed in on me, as ravenous as a wild dog. The client's blood stained his mouth. Keeping my voice even, I announced, "On behalf of this homeowner, I have brought food for you." The hungry man bent down to retrieve his bowl, shuffling towards me on stiff legs. His gait was uneven, as his entire body shook from weakness. I met him halfway, holding the sandwich, out to him cautiously, keeping the other hand on Ratcatcher's hilt in case the hungry man decided he'd prefer to take the phrase about biting the hand that feeds you a bit too literally. Those eyes watched eagerly as I delicately set the sandwich into his bowl. Mouth watering, he seized it just as the bread touched the unglazed clay surface. I barely had enough time to retrieve my hand before he'd inhaled it. I darted back, hand gripping the sword even harder as I feared that I'd be dessert. Licking the remaining blood and jelly off of his cracked lips, the hungry man offered me a smile, showing off perfect white teeth. A dentist's dream. "The homeowner is most gracious," the hungry man said. "In the approaching troubles, she and all others under her roof will be cared for." Naturally, that statement made me uneasy. Troubles? Instead of answering, he turned to leave, his grip on the clay bowl still just as fragile as it had been before. As much as I wanted answers, I couldn't focus on his ominous words at the moment. I had to check on the client. She was still on the phone with Deedra when she apprehensively answered the door. Blood coated her plump forearm from a swollen, jagged dent left by the hungry man's peculiarly pristine teeth. The sight of it made me shudder. It definitely needed stitches. The client was understandably shaken up, and her arm looked like something straight out of a zombie movie, but otherwise she was all right. I assisted her in dressing the wound to staunch the bleeding before offering to drive her to the emergency room. The entire time, Deidre stayed on the phone with her. I overheard them talking about choir, of all things. They apparently had bonded over both being mezzos. I have no idea what that means. The client was trying to encourage Deidre to join. Upon reflection, that seems to be where Deidre's strength at Orion has been, client relations. It may not seem like much, but when it comes to making a client feel safe, or trying to keep them level-headed enough that they'll listen to our advice, it's a useful thing. A big part of this job is customer service, after all. In regards to the prevention of any further incidents, the client has been advised to leave an offering of bread out on her porch nightly. Even something small will be appreciated by the hungry man, or covered in peanut butter, apparently. As a victim of the hunger grass, no matter how much the hungry man eats, his belly will remain forever empty. Have you ever been so ravenous that your stomach begins to cramp? Every movement is hindered by shakes. You're lightheaded and exhausted. All you want is to eat. Now, imagine feeling that way for an eternity. That is the curse of the hunger grass. That all being said, these neighbors are much more powerful than they appear. They have single-handedly caused the ruin of kings and, in turn, granted unimaginable prosperity to paupers. Those who are generous enough to offer the hungry man a meal, even a small one, will be blessed with good luck for the rest of their lives. On the flip side, mocking or attempting to harm the starving neighbor causes one to share in their dreadful starvation until they eventually wither away from malnutrition. As frightening as this has been for the client, she and her family will be rewarded as long as they keep up on offerings. From what I hear around the village, they've already begun to reap the benefits. Case in point, there was a lot of hubbub amongst the townies about how the client's husband was unexpectedly granted an incredible settlement upon winning a decades-long court battle after experiencing a disabling injury at one of the oil refineries. Along with that, their daughter apparently received a full scholarship to the University of Pennsylvania. When it comes to the thing the hungry man had said about impending troubles, I also should mention that these neighbors have been known to appear during times of hardship and famine. His very presence is a bad omen, not just because of his association to hunger grass, but because of what may lie ahead for Orion's operating area. In general, some of the counties we work in tend to be home to struggling areas, dying industrial towns left to rot after the population's jobs were shipped overseas, local farms busting their asses to keep up with huge industrial farms across the country. There are some middle-class and upper-middle-class suburban developments here and there, but broadly speaking, many people have been hit by hard times. Food insecurity is an unfortunate reality for many of these places. To summarize, I can't say I'm surprised that a hungry man has ended up here. It is said that one can protect themselves against the hunger grass influence by carrying a crust of bread in a pocket. However, it isn't an airtight method of prevention. Depending on the severity of the curse on the area, the bread may not be enough to save someone who's found themselves in contact with it. That, and imagine just having dry, crumbly bread in your pocket all the time. You'd be a walking anthill. As of right now, we're trying to find where the hunger grass could be, and along with that, what could have even caused its growth. I've mentioned previously that one of the hypotheses surrounding its occurrence is that the neighbors may plant it out of spite. Deedra had confirmed this for us when we all got together to discuss what had happened. However, since its appearance was so recent, she didn't know where the hunger grass could have taken root. Lucky me, I know 3 neighbors who are well versed in the art of torturing mortals. To be clear, I don't believe the hunters were responsible for planting it. For one, none of them seem like they'd be much into gardening, not even Grandma Yolo. And for another, they appear to prefer to be more direct when it comes to their methods. However, they could give us a lead on either where to find it or what brought it here. Looks like Grandmother Dearest is getting another skull for Christmas. Will anyone be surprised when I say that the holidays were hectic for us? For starters, on the days leading up to Christmas Eve, we always get carolers. As their name implies, they go door to door bringing holiday cheer to all that make the mistake of answering the doorbell. One way to differentiate them from the typical sorts of carolers is that the songs that they sing are much older. I'm not sure what the names of these funky, fresh tunes are, but the words seem to be Proto-Germanic in origin, according to recordings that were taken by our buddies in Ohio. Another way to tell is that no matter how long you stare at their faces, you can't quite make out any of their features, like you're viewing them through frosted glass. Something else that to note is that their numbers grow each time that they successfully get someone to listen to them sing. The moment the unfortunate listener becomes a part of the merry mob, their features become obscured like the others. And somehow each member of this atypical choral group always knows the words to these ancient hymns, despite having never heard them or the language they're spoken in before. Over the years, Orion has tried numerous ways to free those who've been absorbed by the carolers, but nothing has worked, not even salt or iron. Restraining them only makes things worse. If they are taken too far away from the rest of the herd, they'll begin to bleed from the mouth and ears, resulting in damage to the victim's hearing and vocal cords. However, once the clock strikes midnight, the enchantment ends. The carolers wander back to their homes in a stupor and wake up with no memory of what happened the previous night. They also tend to be sore, exhausted, and confused about why their voices have gone scratchy. Once someone becomes a part of the troupe, the best thing that Orion can do for them is follow the group while wearing noise-cancelling headphones to ensure that once midnight comes, the affected individuals get home safely. So far, at least in my time of being employed here, nobody has been taken permanently. It's a bizarre occurrence, to be sure, but as far as calls go, the carolers are fairly non-threatening. The danger presented by them isn't from the carolers themselves, but by what is attracted to them. This is a creature that hates all expressions of holiday cheer. It has been known to vandalize any decorations that it comes across. In extreme cases, it has broken into homes and businesses that offend it to forcibly remove everything within that reminds it of Christmas. Thankfully, the latter does not happen as often as the former. Considering how destructive this particular pest is, I'm thankful that it only emerges on Christmas Eve. That's when staying on the carolers' tails becomes crucial. On the night before Christmas, this task fell to Raina and I. She noticed the threat before I did, pointing out the tall figure. It was covered in green fur, its yellow eyes shining in the darkness. The pest had also fashioned some semblance of a Santa Claus costume, though it wasn't cut evenly in some places and appeared to have been burned at some point. This is the pest that has dubbed itself the Mean One. Something else to note about it is that it is capable of communicating. We got the mean one from a letter it had left on a Christmas tree that it had incinerated 2 years back, written entirely in rhymes. The title is a bit goofy and not what I would have picked, but when these things provide one, it's generally best to use it to avoid insulting them. So, the mean one it is. Like I mentioned before, the mean one mainly seems focused on property damage, but it has been known to attack humans occasionally. The boss told me about how it had clawed an extremely unfortunate mall Santa to the point of disfigurement before I started. The mean one has also injured carolers in the past, who are completely helpless while under their enchantment. It doesn't appear to matter to the mean one that the carolers are singing songs that obviously predate modern-day Christmas. The mean one appeared to be grumbling to itself as it followed us, flexing and unflexing its elongated fingers. We couldn't talk much with the sound-cancelling headphones on, so Raina and I were reduced to communicating through gestures. I motioned for her to stay near the carolers while I approached the mean one. Even though the pest has a good understanding of English, as evidenced by that letter I mentioned, it's never been keen on speaking to us in the past. It was always possible that it could write in our language, but not speak it. Couldn't hurt to try, though. See if I could dissuade it from hurting someone. As I got closer, I became acutely aware of how tall this thing was, looming insidiously over me. A pungent smell wafted off of the pest as well, making me suppress a gag. The odor could best be described as a hellish mixture of rotten tomatoes and ripe, expired old seafood. Once I was a safe distance away from the carolers, I slid one of the headphones cups off of my right ear as I called out to the mean one, "Excuse me, may I have a word?" Its yellow eyes blazed as it growled, deep in its throat. "Do you expect me to speak to you while you carry that sword?" Avoiding touching Ratcatcher's hilt, I assured the mean one, "I don't want trouble. The sword is just in case things get out of hand." "Put it down. That is a demand," it snapped. At first, I thought its way of speaking was outlandish until it occurred to me that it was rhyming with me. "I can't put it down unless I know that you won't harm the carolers," I explained using my difficult customer voice. "They aren't in control of their actions. They can't help what they're doing. Please just let them get through the night." The mean one's green lip curled in a snarl, revealing that termites were squirming amongst its crooked, stained teeth. "You'll put it down, unless you want a fight." Its absurdly long fingers flexed again. Through the lengthy fur, I couldn't make out its claws, but I knew that they were there. That poor mall Santa could attest to that. "I'm going to reach for the hilt so that I can set it on the ground." I explained to the mean one slowly so that it wouldn't think I was moving to attack. Without making any sudden movements, I grasped Ratcatcher's hilt, gingerly withdrawing the sword from its sheath, keeping it close by so that it would still be easy to reach in case shit hit the fan. The mean one's eyes followed me distrustfully the entire time. "Now are you willing to talk?" I started to inquire, just as the mean one swiped a claw at me. I staggered back, dropping to grab Ratcatcher before having to roll away from another slash. Fabric ripped, the back of my arm stinging as the mean one nicked me. Grimacing against the pain, I retaliated, swinging the sword towards its chest. The pest was quick, but thankfully nowhere near as fast or dexterous as my usual sparring opponents. It moved clumsily and without any sort of technique beyond trying to scratch me to death, kind of like trying to fight a large green bipedal cat. After it left itself open with another vicious slash, I took advantage, giving the mean one a neat little slice in its cheek. It blinked in disbelief, reaching up gingerly to touch the cut. Once it saw the blood on its fingertips, it turned tail and scurried away into the night, leaving me to stand there like an idiot in my confusion. That was it. That couldn't be it. Apprehensive, I put my headphones back over my ears properly and rejoined Raina on high alert. That couldn't be it. The mean one wouldn't just give up after getting hit one time, would it? Most of the pests we deal with are pretty tenacious when it comes to punishing those that they believe to have caused them great offense, so I expected this one to be no different. Until midnight finally came, Raina and I waited for the mean one to return and retaliate. It didn't. Through this encounter, we've learned two things. The first is that it can speak, albeit in an obnoxious fashion. The second is that it's cowardly when faced with direct confrontation. Good to know for the future. On another note, our search for the hunger grass has been fruitless. We started off near where the hungry man was first spotted, figuring that he wouldn't stray too far from his home. It would be far more convenient if the cursed grass looked sinister, or at least instilled an off-putting feeling in those that passed by it, but part of why it's so dangerous is due to its ability to camouflage itself so well. When the use of hagstones didn't yield any results either, the idea was brought up to locate and follow the hungry man to see if that could lead us to the grass. However, Vic quickly shot it down, wisely reminding us that angering this neighbor would have catastrophic consequences. After a couple more days of futile searching, I decided it was time to bite the bullet and ask the banjo bastard about it. What truly sucks is he actually gave me the 3 nights preceding Christmas off from training, and instead of enjoying one of them, I was making the trek through the woods towards the skull trees with an offering in hand. This time, it was a coyote's skull. One of the local hunters had it for sale at a flea market, along with some incredible deer jerky. Like last time, I made his offering festive, wrapping the skull in colourful paper decorated with little cartoon reindeer. Unfortunately, I ran out of it part-way through and ended up needing to haphazardly tape a square with a completely different pattern on it to cover the whole thing. I slapped a ribbon on top of the monstrosity to try to improve its appearance, but this addition only made it look even more like it had been wrapped by a 5-year-old. I found Iolo at the skull trees sporting a Santa hat. He sat in front of the fire, eyes shut contentedly as the logs crackled. Psychopath even decorated a few of the trees, hanging ornaments off of exposed rib cages and weaving string lights through empty eye sockets. Without looking at me, he greeted me very kindly. "Thought I told you to fuck off for the evening?" I ignored him, too preoccupied with his disturbing display of Yuletide cheer. "Aren't you worried about someone seeing this?" "No, not particularly," the mechanic replied with a smile, opening one eye. "I'm always looking to add more to my collection." Christ, good thing his clearing is pretty deep in the woods. "I don't think some last-minute decorations are going to put you on Santa's nice list," I told him. "Oh, this?" He raised his eyebrows. "This ain't for him. We got a little gathering going on, so whatever you're here for, you best make it quick." Not wanting to risk the possibility of being the Wild Hunt's entertainment for their little hangout, I presented the offering to Iolo. When he saw the catastrophic wrapping job, he snorted. "You wrap this in the dark, Fiona." "It's what's inside that counts," I reminded him. "This offering is in exchange for information, if you accept it." "About?" "There is hunger grass growing in this area, and I need to know where." Iolo tore the paper off, giving the coyote skull an approving nod and a He then rose from his seat to set it on top of the tree, containing the remains of the 2 ill-fated monster hunters he'd punished for harassing the neighbors in our operating area, placing it on what was left of the one skull. Seeming not to care about how horrified I was by this grotesque display, Iolo came to stand in front of me, asking, "What makes you think I'd know anything about that?" "I don't," I replied honestly. "But given that you have eyes and ears everywhere, I figured you'd be a good place to start." The mechanic crossed his arms, his eyes slitting as if he was searching my face for something. "I might have heard something. What do you plan on doing once you find it?" While researching the hunger grass, we've found that there are a few potential methods to dispel the curse. One way is to sprinkle breadcrumbs over the affected area. Allegedly, this will free those who've come into contact with it, as well as clear up the infestation. The grass can also be burnt, but there is nothing in the records we found that states exactly how this treatment method will affect those suffering from its effects. Once we find it, the plan is to try the breadcrumbs. Then if that doesn't work, burn it up. Seemed solid enough to me. However, when I explained all of this to Iolo, that apparently wasn't the answer he'd wanted. Ain't you curious about why it showed up in the first place? Of course, I told him. We just need to stop the grass and those who are connected to it from hurting anyone else first. We've already had one incident, and for all we know, there could be more that no one has alerted us to. The corner of the mechanic's mouth lifted. So, what exactly are you wanting out of this? Need one of us to show you where it is, or are you just looking for information? Offering'll only get you one or the other. Both would be valuable, especially since there was clearly something to the why of it that he was keeping to himself. Why be coy? I challenged him. There's obviously something you want to say. His eyes narrowed. You ain't new here, Fiona. The rules don't suddenly change just because we're trying to play nice with one another. Now, unless you want to owe me a favor, you'll pick one. I weighed the two options. Getting rid of it as soon as possible was top priority, but knowing how it started could give us a better idea of what caused the growth in the first place. Sure, we'd get rid of one patch, but another could spring up elsewhere, especially if a vindictive neighbor is responsible for it. Getting rid of this section could potentially only be a band-aid solution. In the end, I decided, for now I'm going to say that being led to the grass would be the most useful thing. But I do want you to know that I'll bring you another offering for any other information you may have on it later on. Iolo shrugged one shoulder. Alrighty. Just know it ain't happening tonight. If you wanted instant service, you could have brought me one from a human. Imagine old Blue Eyes would have one floating around. Tomorrow then, I said, ignoring his final comment, knowing it was intended to get under my skin. In the morning, if that works. If not, then the day after Yule. He let out a laugh, eyebrows furrowed as if I'd said something profane. So we're on your time now? My intention wasn't to insult you, I replied calmly, hoping to avoid becoming the piñata for his Christmas party. I was just trying to find a good time to do it, and didn't phrase it very well. His smile would have looked friendly to the untrained eye. Maybe you should join us tonight, since we're on such casual terms and all. Oh shit. To my credit, I remained completely composed. I appreciate the invitation, but sadly I have to decline. Wasn't asking. His curt reply made my mouth go dry. I knew better than to keep pushing. Fuck. Resigned, I sighed. Okay. What am I in for? We got someone special coming tonight, he told me vaguely. Do as you're told, don't ask questions, don't be annoying. Think you can handle that? Naturally, that cleared nothing up. However, I didn't have the chance to pester him about it. There were footsteps approaching. Imagine my surprise when Victor was the one who was illuminated by the firelight, looking equally as baffled to see me as I was to see him. What are you doing here? He demanded. I balked. Me? What are you doing here? I invited him, Iolo interjected nonchalantly. Got a little ceremony that he's going to want to be a part of. What was that supposed to mean? Victor then quietly started to inform me. The grey mare is coming. Before he could elaborate further, we were interrupted by the sound of bells jingling. I turned to see one of the CW and Anode Balwen bounding through the woods, wearing a collar covered with red and green bells, as well as an antler headband. I meant to be here sooner. The Houndmaster's voice preceded her appearance, but someone was being disagreeable about the collar. The hound looked around innocently, with its red ears back as if to say, "Who? Me?" Iolo stared down at the dog curiously as he took his seat back. Surprised she ain't rip 'em off yet. Give her time, the Houndmaster said with a long-suffering sigh. Now that she was close, I could see that she was wearing a matching pair of fake antlers also covered in little bells, as well as a kitschy green sweater covered in tinsel and tassels shaped like Christmas trees. The get-up contrasted with her usual no-nonsense demeanor to the point of being comical. Am I dreaming? Judging by the barely concealed look of puzzlement drawing Victor's eyebrows together, he was feeling the same way as I was. The hound settled down next to us, its floppy ears pointed forward as if listening for something. The surreal quality of the evening only increased when Briar arrived. At first, I'd thought he'd scrooged out until I saw the gold tinsel he'd woven into a few accent braids in his wavy hair. He'd even found a small red ornament to wear as an earring, standing out against the plain pewter of the rest of his piercings. Victor noticeably stiffened when he saw the thorned huntsman, pointedly avoiding eye contact. What was that about? Our guest of honor is on her way, Briar announced, promptly sitting in Yolo's lap and wrapping his arm around the captain of the Wild Hunt's shoulders. Did Redneck Santa bring me anything? What the hell is going on? Not fazed in the slightest, Iolo nodded towards us. Got some volunteers. And some Christmas spirit. He handed Briar a flask that he'd produced from his inside coat pocket, then told his colleague to get off before their combined weight broke the chair. He then playfully kicked the thorned hunter in the rear as he strode towards the houndmaster. This has to be a dream. Volunteers for what? I inquired, trying not to sound impatient. The mare requires an escort. The houndmaster explained, looking me up and down as if just noticing me. Though I wasn't expecting you to be a part of it. Yeah, you and me both. The mechanic flashed a grin. She wasn't, till she opened her fucking mouth. At that, Victor gave me the glare. All of the defenses that my mind could summon were fairly weak. In retrospect, I think Iolo was looking for some sort of excuse to trap me with him for the evening, and my dumbass served it up to him on a silver platter. There was the stomping of hooves along with the sound of more bells jingling before I saw the mechanic's special guest. At first, I thought the being sauntering towards us was wearing a horse's skull as a mask, but then I quickly realized that it was the mare's head. It was difficult to make out the shape of the rest of her body under the billowing white sheet she wore, though it appeared she was bipedal, judging by her gait. Round ornaments, one red and one green, shone from the skull's empty sockets in the place of eyes. Matching ribbons danced from the top of the being's head in the breeze. Dangling beneath her jaw was a set of reins covered in red, green and gold jingle bells. Season's greetings, the mare crowed in a voice that reminded me of the wind howling through bare branches during a snowstorm, and merry meetings. Iolo emerged from his seat to welcome the ominous newcomer. They exchanged words in what sounded like Welsh, and at one point he smirked toward us. I didn't trust that expression, not one bit. Once their discussion concluded, Iolo's attention shifted towards Victor. You know the tradition, Blue Eyes? The boss confirmed that he did. That made one of us. The mechanic smiled. Then it'll fall on you to fill the Mari Lwyd's hosts in. Can somebody please explain to me? I started to ask when a mask appeared in my face, its empty eyes revealing that the one holding it was the Houndmaster. She had donned a white one, accented with gold swirls along its forehead and cheeks. You'll want this, unless you're fine with the homeowners recognizing you, she said, only increasing my discombobulation. Losing my patience, I questioned, are we robbing people? What is this? That earned a snicker from Briar, who'd adopted a black mask featuring a long nose and intimidating snarl. He approached the boss, getting far closer than needed to give him a mask that reminded me of Krampus with its fangs and curved horns. The mare was the one that answered in her terrible voice, "From house to house we will eat, drink and be merry. Dampen that frown, for there is no need to be wary." In case I haven't made it clear, I'm really, really sick of rhymes. And I couldn't help but notice that nobody had outright said that we weren't breaking and entering into any homes. Through the glaring eyes of his silver mask that bore a wide, wicked grin, Iolo's impatient gaze looked more menacing than usual. With numb, reluctant fingers, I accepted the disguise being offered to me. A clown. Fitting. But also, fuck them. Once all of our faces were covered, Iolo gave the Mari a deep bow before taking her reins in one hand. The sheet covering her body undulated in a ghostly manner, revealing a nauseating tangle of bone, hooves, and humanoid feet beneath it. Unnerved, I tore my gaze away from the mare, following the hunters and their equine guest. Meanwhile, the hound trotted along next to us, obediently staying near its master. Along the way, Victor hurriedly explained the tradition that he and I were being roped into. Iolo was acting as the mare's leader, taking on the responsibility of guiding her from house to house. Those that answered when the mare knocked had to participate in a battle of song and, you guessed it, rhymes. If the homeowners gave up or failed to think of a proper rebuttal in time, they'd be forced to let the mare in. That prompted me to ask, what happens when the mare goes in? It eats, he responded, also clearly on edge. To what end? I'm not sure yet, but the homeowners will be expected to provide a feast of whatever they have available. So we really are burglarizing people, I muttered in disbelief. Briar helpfully called over his shoulder, we're burglarizing them festively. Victor ignored him. According to what I've heard, the mayor does grant blessings to whoever allows her and her escorts in. We just have to hope that whoever the mechanic chooses will be willing to play along. Given how well the clients in our operating area listen when there isn't a skeletal horse accompanied by an entourage clad in intimidating masks, that didn't bode well. For example, every housekeeper case that has been documented on this Reddit account. To my chagrin, we were approaching the suburbs. Call me judgmental if you want, but I've had far too many negative experiences with the residents of the cul-de-sac we were wandering into. The first house we approached was one of the biggest ones on the block, complete with a 2-car garage. That may not sound luxurious to some, but for this area, that's just one garage away from being a McMansion. An elaborate chandelier was visible in a massive round window above the door. Yeah, we're definitely getting sued if these people figure out who we are. I was glad that I'd picked that night to not wear my company jacket. Victor had done the same. Just had to hope no one recognized our voices or unmasked us. Iolo knocked for the mare. That was Victor's cue to move up front. Already, I was tempted to burrow into a hole in the dirt like a groundhog to escape this incredibly uncomfortable situation. The door opened a crack only for it to slam shut as the person who'd opened it screamed. A completely reasonable reaction, I'd say. Iolo simply shrugged, half turning to announce a little too cheerfully, "All right, next house." This was ridiculous. There was no way that anyone would answer the door for our little nightmare procession, let alone engage in a rhyming battle of wits as the only way to keep us from gaining entry. But that begged the question of what would happen if the mayor spent the night unsatisfied. Would we or any of those that denied her be punished? Would we have to resort to forcing our way in, or did we have to be invited? Did the feast matter more, or the ritual? There was a cacophony of jingling as the mare suddenly wrenched her reins out of Iolo's grasp, the ornaments in her empty sockets reflecting the Christmas lights around us as she faced me. I froze as the mare spoke to me. "Were you not warned of what lies ahead? Recall your meeting with the starving dead." My throat tightened from the directness of her confrontation. "Famine is on the horizon," I told her, then quickly added, "for every father and son." Not a good rhyme by any means, but considering that I'd already unintentionally provoked the mare with my doubts, I didn't want to take the chance of angering her further. As she crept closer, hooves echoing loudly against the pavement, the air felt heavy as she responded. "There are some that can be spared. They need only to answer their door and offer their fair share." So this was some attempt at aid. Vic had said that this ominous being was known to reward those who participated in this ritual. I wasn't sure if the mare was capable of lying, and nothing I found in regards to her has stated if she is bound to the same rules as the neighbors. However, With the mare's bony snout within arm's reach, all notions of questioning her died as I became acutely aware of how big her teeth were. The old ways have been forgotten, the mare continued, her decorations jingling in a way that seemed to punctuate her words. In their place, new traditions were begotten. The old will feel no sympathy for the young, as they are similarly usurped and replaced. If you wish to delay that moment, young one, then we must make haste. The mare then silently gauged me after she finished saying her piece. I couldn't tell if she wanted me to respond. Not wanting to have to think of another rhyme, I simply nodded. That seemed to have satisfied her, as she swiveled back towards Iolo in a flurry of ribbons and white cloth. Meanwhile, I could feel the huntsman's glare scathing me. As far as he was concerned, I'd just disobeyed his order to simply do as I was told without questioning anything. From where I stayed at the back of the group, I faintly heard Victor tell the mechanic that he had an idea. Not long afterwards, the boss summoned me. Since you and the Houndmaster look the least intimidating of everyone here, you two will go to the next house first. Tell the homeowner it's an event sponsored by the trustees if you have to. I know one of them, so hopefully I can get him on board tomorrow. If the homeowners are open to it, I'll explain the rules to them from there, Victor told me. While he was relaying this to me, something caught my eye. There were thin little cuts on his wrist. Their imprint in his grey skin was easily recognizable as being from Briar's thorns. When did that happen? They looked fresh. Sounding as if he was smiling, Iolo chimed in. And before you argue, Fiona, you and old Blue Eyes here are the only ones that can lie. Gotta be one of you, and since your boss here has all the charm of a corpse, it'd be best if he just kept his mouth shut. Subtly, I heard a soft scoff behind Victor's Krampus mask, but Iolo seemed much more invested in making me miserable than him. You tell me I'm annoying every 5 minutes, I pointed out. Well, that's because you are, he said matter-of-factly. Prick. But you're annoying in a way that makes you endearing, so just do your usual bullshit and get us in there, all right? The mare's head turned so that it was facing backwards towards me. With her watching me, I didn't dare denounce this plan or go against it. Once I'd agreed to it without causing any trouble, she gradually turned to face forward again. My skin crawled afterwards, making the unseasonably warm night suddenly feel about 10 degrees cooler. The hound bounded ahead of its master as she and I flounced towards the next house. The dog then sat attentively in front of the door, tail wagging adorably. With a deep breath to steel myself, I rang the doorbell. We best make this work, the Houndmaster muttered to me. The mare's time on the surface is limited. Wouldn't want her to lose patience. That definitely didn't sound good. I didn't get a chance to reply as the homeowners answered, while one of the men immediately began fawning over the hound in its festive little collar, and Antlers, his partner, watched the huntress and I apprehensively. Can we help you? He asked slowly, as if unsure if he wanted to hear our answer. I began brilliantly. I know this looks a bit strange, but we're actually doing a cultural reenactment for you tonight if you're willing to participate. I went a little off the plan, but at least I saved Vic from having to call that trustee. The man who'd been enamored with the hound rose up to say, "Oh, really? What culture?" "Welsh." The Houndmaster supplied politely, saving me from having to stammer more. "This tradition is said to bring good luck to those who participate." "Oh, we could use some of that, couldn't we, babe?" the dog lover chirped, playfully slapping the other man on the chest, to which his partner replied, "Yeah, no more eggnog for you." "So you want to try it out?" I prodded, trying to sound cheery, hoping it didn't come off as too artificial. The dog lover threw a hand in the air. "Why not? It could be fun." Oh boy, here we go. That was Victor's cue to explain the rules. The dog lover's partner made a quip about how he was going to need more holiday spirit for this, but otherwise the two men seemed on board once they briefly stepped back inside to refill their eggnog. For their sake, I prayed that I hadn't just coerced them into something horrible. With that out of the way, the battle of wits had begun. Some of Yins may want to know what all was said, but frankly I'm so sick of rhymes and don't want to transcribe more than I have to, especially since the homeowners and the mayor went back and forth for a good while. In a shocking turn of events, it seemed like both parties were actually having fun. Every once in a while, one of the hunters would retort instead of the skeletal horse. And to his credit, the dog lover was much better at thinking up rhymes than I was, even while tipsy. Over time, both groups devolved from clever, well-thought-out barbs to lines such as, "I'll fuck your dad and your mum, you damn peeping Tom." I'll let Yins guess which hunter was responsible for that gem. In the end, the homeowners lost. My heart sank when I saw the two men look at each other, cackling uproariously as they both failed to come up with a word that rhymes with tomfoolery. "So, do we really have to invite you in now?" the partner asked, nowhere near as nervous as he probably should have been. Iolo shrugged as if it were no big deal. "Yup, that's the tradition." "Ah, okay. That was pretty fun, so I guess a few minutes wouldn't hurt." The mare took off, tearing the reins from Iolo's grip. Startled by her sudden movement, the homeowners jumped back, the dog lover letting out a shaky, nervous laugh as she made a beeline towards their dining room. The hunters merely filed in after her, leaving the homeowners aghast. The hound had even begun sniffing around once it crossed the threshold. Hesitantly, Victor and I followed suit. "Someone's, excited," the dog lover joked anxiously, eyes huge as the mare stuck her face in their bowl of eggnog like a pig drinking from a trough. It was a strange spectacle to witness. I'd expected it to dribble from her exposed mandible and onto the floor, but each gulp disappeared behind her snapping jaws. She even managed not to get a single drop on her white sheet. Iolo merely observed the mare's gluttony with his arms folded over his chest. Noticing that some mistletoe hung on the other side of the room, I avoided it and him like they both were carriers of the bubonic plague. To my horror, Briar took out his flask, presenting it to the couple as he asked if they had any aversions to Jameson. Just as I stepped forward to warn them, I felt something catch my belt loop, keeping me in place. I turned to see Iolo's grinning mask and Santa hat. He chided me, "You ever consider relaxing for once in your life?" "I know what happens when Yins offer food or drinks to mortals," I argued. "Now let me." "It's just whiskey, offered freely in the spirit of the season," he replied aloofly. "The rules are a bit different tonight. Seeing as we ain't seeking to take anyone, I'll tell you again, Fiona, relax, you might even have some fun for once." Similarly, Victor had needed to be stopped from interfering by the houndmaster. He'd been about to shout to get their attention until she squeezed his arm hard enough to silence him. "I can't. I know you too well," I retorted. His eyes narrowed, stepping between me and our unwitting hosts before I could make another break for it, close enough to quietly argue, "You know damn well I can't lie. That whiskey ain't from our world. It won't change 'em or hurt 'em. Now this is twice that you've had to be corrected, once from our guest, the other from me. Don't make me do it a third time." All I could do was watch as the homeowners shared liquor with the huntsman, blissfully unaware of the danger that they were in. Once the shot made it down their throats, I expected to see something terrible happen, for them to melt into easily moldable parts for the hunters to rearrange. Instead, they kept laughing and joking with Briar while occasionally sneaking worried glances towards the mare. By this point, she'd moved on to a plate of brightly decorated Christmas cookies. "See? Nothing happened," Iolo sneered. With how thin his patience was that night, I wasn't certain if questioning him or trying to bicker further would be wise. I did my best to keep the strain out of my voice as I responded, "Okay." I was just worried for their well-being, especially since the mayor wants to grant them a blessing. It might help if I know what your intentions are. His glare didn't soften any. Simple: escort our esteemed guest, show her a good time, and at some point get a nice buzz going. That good enough for you? "I appreciate you being transparent," I said evenly despite the bite of his tone. I had to resist the urge to roll my eyes when he scoffed, "Yeah, you better." The mare eventually got her fill, but there wasn't much left. I watched with bated breath as the dog lover consumed one of the few Christmas cookies left behind. He seemed to be able to taste it. That helped ease my nerves some. On our way out, the mare bowed her skeletal head to them. "In the upcoming trials and tribulations, you will be granted salvation." The couple awkwardly thanked her, the dog lover's partner even giving her a timid little wave. I could imagine that the pair were more confused than they'd ever been in their lives, but hopefully, whatever blessings have been granted to them will be worth that one uncomfortable evening. We followed the same strategy with the rest of houses with varying success, but more than what we had before prior to Victor's suggestion. The idea of the hunters offering our unsuspecting hosts drinks still didn't sit right with me, but there was little that could be done about it. Some of the people we visited seemed to enjoy the mayor's visit, while others appeared to be humoring us, though whether it was out of politeness or fear I wasn't sure. After a while I lost track of how many doors we stopped at and just shut my brain off, ready to come home and ideally not hear any more rhymes for the rest of my life. By the time we were finally done, Briar's flask was completely empty and the thorny boy was clearly feeling pretty good. He kept finding excuses to speak to the boss as we headed back towards the skull trees, occasionally bumping into Victor or touching his arm. Victor simply stared straight ahead, only speaking when spoken to. Along with that, the Houndmaster had started to loosen up a bit, and through what could best be described as a Christmas miracle, Iolo had removed the bug that had crawled up his ass earlier and was actually being somewhat pleasant. As we got closer to the clearing, the hunters removed their masks, indicating that it was fine for us to do the same. The fresh air was welcome after hours of having that hard plastic on my face. The mare stopped to stand before the fire, the ornaments that served as her eyes glimmering as she faced the boss and me. "Go forth, for your duty has been done. From now until the end of days, I will not forget the generosity of Orion." She didn't have to tell me twice. I gave her a polite bow, unsure if that was the proper way to bid her goodbye, but she seemed to accept it. Victor did the same. It didn't escape my notice that Briar watched him with unabashed intensity as we departed. Once we were far enough away to be out of earshot, I cautiously inquired, "Did you get into a fight with Briar earlier?" He'd been deep in thought when I questioned him, shaking his head as if just remembering that I was capable of speech. "What? Number Y?" I nodded towards him. "Those marks on your wrist. I've had them before." Judging by his reaction to the cuts, he hadn't realized that they were there. But how could he not? Speaking as someone who's had her blood drawn by those thorns more times than I care to acknowledge, it hurts like hell. Without a word, he covered the shallow wounds up with his sleeve. Concerned, I kept pressing him. "Are you all right?" For a long time, the boss remained silent. When he finally spoke, he hesitantly admitted, "Briar got me under the mistletoe earlier, before I got to the mechanics clearing." Eyebrows raised, I gaped at him. I'd known Briar had an interest in him, but I hadn't realized that it had gotten to that point. As someone who's been on the receiving end of a huntsman's unwanted affections, I gently asked him, "Seriously, are you all right?" I don't want to get into details, so I'll just say that I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about it. Victor responded, his expression giving nothing away. But right now, I'm leaning towards some variation of, "Oh shit." Oh shit indeed. I invited him over to hang out and maybe get his mind off of things. He declined, but was grateful for the offer. Understandably, he wanted his solitude, though he swore to call me if he needed me. In other news, I'm pleased to report that Christmas Day was peaceful, just a nice, wholesome dinner with my mom and Deedra, though Mom did do me dirty by breaking out some old videotapes that she'd taken of me as a preteen. I refuse to say what was on them. Just know that they will be destroyed. The hunger grass situation had gotten far worse before it had gotten better. And it's still not entirely resolved. On a mundane trip to the grocery store, I was confused to see that the milk and cream aisle was devoid of the local brand I usually get. Not a single carton in stock. When I asked one of the employees about it, her eyes widened. "You didn't hear?" she asked incredulously. "There was a recall. I guess some sort of illness broke out amongst the cows and farmhands." A recall? Them? Strange. One of the reasons why I buy their products is because I know for a fact that they take good care of their animals. They're pasture-raised, hardy, grass-fed animals. You can drive right by the place and see healthy cows wandering around rather than being trapped in some pen, knee-deep in their own feces. Hold on. Grass. Oh no. Really? I asked uneasily, hoping that I was overreacting. My hopes went unanswered. Yeah, guess a bunch of the cows died from it. They all just started losing weight suddenly, even though they were still eating. People are saying it's some sort of parasite. Shit. I thanked the lady numbly as I darted to the back to get a bribe for a certain huntsman while pulling my phone out to call Victor. We'd later learn that this farm wasn't the only one affected by the hunger grass. There was also a beef recall. Rumor has it that it was from a similar outbreak miles from my go-to. As a result, the shelves in our local grocery have been looking pretty barren. Between potentially contaminated items being pulled off the shelves and people panic buying supplies, I had to go out of town to get a few necessities. What this told me was that the placement of the hunger grass was deliberate. The neighbor that did this knew exactly what it was doing and the widespread carnage it would cause. While it was reasonable to assume that the grass had been planted in the pastures where the cows graze, it would have been impossible for anyone at Orion to differentiate it from regular old grass. And the last thing we needed was for one of us to get cursed, especially since we weren't sure if it would affect the dead duo. I don't think I need to explain why a vampire or a draugr being afflicted with insatiable hunger would be a terrible thing. In other words, we needed the help of a neighbor to locate it, and fast, before more people or animals came into contact with it, or the one responsible decided to keep planting it elsewhere. When Victor answered, I didn't waste any time. The hunger grass is at Rustic Acres. He sighed heavily. Oh, great. That's just, well, shit. Couldn't have said it better myself. I grabbed a pretty bottle, thinking it'd be suitable, then went to the checkout. I'm going to head over to the mechanic's shop, if that's all right with you. See if I can get him to lead me there now, and I'm getting another offering to see if he has any information on what could be responsible. Good. But on that note, since we don't know the full scale of what we're dealing with, I don't like the idea of you going alone. I'm sending Wes to meet you there. Frowning, I pointed out, the last time he and the banjo bastard saw each other, they literally tried to kill each other. Victor reasoned, well, I'm about to meet up with the Department of Wildlife, so I can't go. The mechanic will get testy if I send Deedra, plus she can't drive. Rayna's scared of him, which we both know that fucker will have a field day with, and I'd rather not put her in that position, so who does that leave? Fine, I replied, using 2 fingers to pick up a loaf of bread, which I then dropped. As I crouched to retrieve it, I grumbled, just know that it's probably going to get ugly. He ignored that last gripe. Meeting's about to start. Call me back if something happens. The 2 most bloodthirsty non-humans I know working together. What could possibly go wrong? The company truck was already sitting in the shop's parking lot when I arrived. The first thing I said to Wes when he got out was, if you can play nicely with the other kid, there'll be an ice cream and pizza party for the whole class. He snickered. The only thing I can promise is that if a fight breaks out, it won't be because I was the one starting it. Okay, I said doubtfully, finishing the fight, on the other hand. Wes. When we got inside, we found Iolo dealing with a difficult customer. To the mechanic's credit, there were no traces of irritation in his neutral expression. This might be a controversial opinion, but there is not a single professional actor out there that can compete with the performance of someone who has to work with an ornery member of the public. Despite the mechanic's convincing mask, I knew him well enough to be certain that he was considering hunting this customer for sport. The Jagoff customer was waving his phone in the air, speaking slowly and condescendingly to the captain of the wild hunt as if he were an idiot. I got a voicemail. "Sir, did you listen to the voicemail?" Iolo asked calmly. The guy hesitated before spitting defensively. "Well, you always leave a voicemail when it's done, so I just came right here." I heard Wes let out a soft scoff next to me. This interaction was familiar to us both. We get dumbasses like this at Orion too. "Well, you see, I was calling to let you know I had to order a part, so it's going to take a bit longer than what I originally said," the mechanic patiently explained, leaning forward onto the counter, hands clasped. The guy roughly shoved his phone into his pocket as he huffed. "So, I had my wife take time out of her day and drive me all the way here for nothing is what you're telling me." "Customer service, everybody." Iolo shrugged. "Well, sir, that would be why I left a message." "Don't be a smart ass," the guy bitched. "Just let me know when it's done." The mechanic gave him a bright smile. "Will do." After that, the guy stormed past us, almost running into Wes and slamming the door on his way out like a mature adult. During the overgrown toddler's tantrum, Wes and I just exchanged a look. "He seems delightful," I remarked. Still smiling, Iolo said in a falsely cheery tone, "Oh, he'll be even more delightful once his heart stops. I'll make damn sure of that." Beginning to feel marginally bad for the guy after that remark, I changed the subject, presenting the cognac as I approached the counter. "Would you mind guiding us to the hunger grass as soon as possible?" He eyeballed the bottle in my hand before asking the most alarming possible question. "Which patch?" I blinked at him. "There's more than one." "Yup," he confirmed as he took the cognac from my hand. "Someone is very pissed, and for good reason." "That reason being?" Wes prodded impatiently. Iolo glanced at him with the same amount of disdain normally reserved for obnoxious children screaming in a grocery store, then redirected his attention back to me. "Anyways, you familiar with that housing development? Keeps growing and growing each year like a fucking cancer. If I recall, Breyer took a couple of contractors working for him a few months back. Yins remember the false tree incident. Same development company. There were grumblings amongst townies that they were wanting to expand again. Like last time, there were protests and petitions to stop it. Unfortunately, it appears that what those in charge took away from that situation wasn't to leave the forest alone in general, it was to leave only that patch of woods untouched. When they look at those tall trees that shade us in the hot summers and paint lovely, colorful waves for us in the autumn, they only see undeveloped land, money waiting to be made. Whoever was in charge of this company needed to be contacted, and quickly. This had gone far beyond the last incident that they'd incited, affecting the entire county as opposed to just one small area. The mechanic seemed a tad annoyed when I asked to be excused to call Victor back, but allowed it. I left him and Wes alone to relay all of this to the boss. Once again, the boss sounded tired. "You gotta be fucking kidding me. These people again." "You'd think that they'd learn by now," I lamented. "It's not just local superstitions. Aren't they curious about why so many of their construction crews get attacked, or why their residents have to call us at least once a week?" "As long as they don't have to deal with it themselves, they don't care," Victor snapped. But then, after a beat, his tone abruptly became mysterious. "Actually, that gives me an idea. A bad one." Apprehensive, I questioned, "What is it?" "If I tell you, you'll try to talk me out of it, and you would be right to." Well, that was promising. He continued, "I want you to focus on clearing up the hunger grass. In the meantime, I need you to trust me." I did, and told him so. On another note, I'm going to go on a brief tangent since I know a few of Yins were rightfully concerned about Victor's well-being after the events described in the last post. A few days back, the boss opened up about what happened on the night of the mayor's visit. Briar had caught Victor under a patch of mistletoe growing on an oak tree. Out of respect for the boss, I won't go into details, so I'll just summarize by saying that the kiss was a bit more heated than what the mistletoe tradition usually calls for. At least from what Victor had described, Briar has some concept of consent, unlike the mechanic. The bar for the wild huntsman is in the Hadal zone. What in the hell is wrong with me that I could be attracted to someone like him? He'd asked when we had this talk, eyes distant. In an effort to be comforting, I'd told him, I honestly don't think it says anything negative about you. Don't you think you're being a bit too hard on yourself? How could it not? He replied. When I was with them, I got to see Briar at his worst, making thorns the size of knives grow out of people's skin, piloting their bodies using vines that burrow into their muscles. That made me grimace. Christ. Yeah, that's horrible. I did not want to know that he could do that, and I'm sorry that you had to see it. But at the same time, the attraction still kind of makes sense to me, oddly enough. You're not human anymore, and between managing a place like Orion and your dietary needs, there's no way I could see it working out with a regular person. He nodded slowly, chewing my words over. While he was doing so, I added, and besides the short temper and casual violence, Briar does have a couple of redeeming qualities. For one, it is with deep regret that I have to admit that he is kind of funny sometimes. He quoted that damn mesothelioma commercial at me before the kiss, Victor admitted flatly, and goddamn it, I snorted. Fucking Briar, was all I could say to that. He wryly agreed, yeah, fucking Briar. So, in summary, Vic is all right, just conflicted. Understandably, he's got a lot to sort through when it comes to that. Anyways, the hunger grass. Before hanging up to do whatever risky thing he was planning, Victor re-emphasized that resolving the hunger grass infestation took precedence over everything else. As such, if I needed backup, Raina and Deedra would be on standby. And if a client had to wait to get a regular, non-emergency call resolved, then so be it. When I re-entered the mechanic's shop, I walked into Wes, rolling his eyes and sniping, "Okay, Tinkerbell." What the hell happened while I was outside? Yolo let out a short laugh, eyebrows raised. That the best you got, boy? Just as mediocre with words as you were with that sword. Couldn't even tell I was fucking with you. Coolly, Wes responded. You talk real tough for someone I could kill with a can of Raid. While Iolo cackled, shaking his head, I interjected, Okay, I don't know what was said or done while I was talking to the boss, but we have more important matters to attend to. Can we please focus? That was an odd experience, me having to play the peacekeeper instead of being the one in an argument with the mechanic. I felt like a fish that had washed onto land while two squirrels were squabbling over an acorn. All righty, the mechanic said after staring Wes down with a smirk. Let me lock a few things up, then we'll head out. Wes gave him a sardonic grin. Meet you out there. Once we were outside, and I was confident that the banjo bastard wouldn't be able to overhear, I demanded to know what happened while I was away. Clearly still irritated, Wes replied, The usual. Dragonfly was being himself, and I didn't put up with it. Sounds about right. He knows you've got a chip on your shoulder. That was when the pot, me, whispered to the kettle, Wes, try not to let him goad you. Slowly, Wes turned to me to raise an eyebrow, wordlessly pointing out the hypocrisy of my statement. Yeah, I know, I agreed. That's pretty rich coming from me. I'll be the first to admit that I let him get under my skin more often than I should, but the last thing we need is to piss him off before we can take care of this infestation. You're right, which is why I'll wait until after we're done dealing with the evil grass. My eyes narrowed suspiciously. For what? The conversation was cut off when we heard the shop's door shut. Once the mechanic got done closing up his shop, fiddle case in hand, he sauntered to his truck. That gave me pause. Why that, instead of the banjo? While I doubted that he'd give me a straight answer, I was tempted to ask about it once we reached our destination. It's not like I can call him the fiddle bastard. That just sounds wrong. Very wrong. Fiddle fucker? Nope. That's infinitely worse. I should delete that, but I'm not going to. Enjoy that window into my mind, everybody. When we got back to the company vehicle, I was relieved to see that Wes's hagstone was in the glove box. I made him take it, not putting it past Iolo to retaliate over that raid comment. I also made sure to bring the bread with us, not just to dispel the curse, but in case we encountered the hungry man again. I wasn't sure how the emaciated neighbor would react if he caught us trying to get rid of his home. However, I was wondering if his situation was similar to Deidre's. What if he didn't want his tie to the grass? Maybe he was trapped just like how she was. Since I'd only encountered the hungry man once, I didn't have much to go off of. This was pure speculation. Any idea of what could be waiting for us? Wes questioned on the way there. I shrugged helplessly. Not really. According to our records, many different types of neighbors could have been the ones responsible, from a weeper to a muse. So, unfortunately, we're probably going to end up learning the hard way. That's nothing new for us. There's a part of me that wishes we could go back to dealing with simple things. Neighbor infestations that could easily be resolved with some cream and a line of salt. However, in the long run, I suppose it's better that Orion has been pushed to contend with more powerful and complicated dilemmas. Just a few months ago, we might not have known where to start when it comes to a hunger grass outbreak. The blue truck's brake lights and turn signals snapped me out of my thoughts. We were passing rustic acres, taking a neglected back road a bit past the farm. That one was expected. Now, it was just a matter of where on the property the cursed thicket was located, and avoiding trespassing charges. The mechanic had parked on the shoulder, explaining that we were going to trek through the woods to get to the pasture to avoid that very scenario. Okay, good thing I dressed warm. This polar vortex has turned Pennsylvania into a frozen hellscape. While following him towards the pasture, I inquired about the fiddle case. No banjo today, huh? Nope. Strange. Normally he loves to hear the sound of his own voice. While we were about to trespass, his unusual quiet didn't seem like it was due to any desire for stealth. The mechanic's eyes harbored more intensity than usual as he marched us towards our destination, mouth drawn in a strict line. He was ready for a fight. Against what, I wasn't sure, but if it was enough to put Iolo on edge, that made me uneasy. I kept a hand on Ratcatcher, ready to draw it if needed. At the same time, Wes also kept alert, listening keenly to our surroundings. A cow's loud grunt greeted us as we crossed the threshold of the forest to infiltrate their pasture. When I saw the animals, I teared up. And before I get into why, I'll warn Yins now. It neither started well nor ended well for them. This was a bad case for us. Proceed with caution. Their eyes bulged from their sockets, wet with anguish, like they were pleading for help as best as they could. Their coats, thick for the winter, were dull, showing the spikes of their ribs beneath. Many of the unfortunate cattle didn't have the strength to stand, their breathing labored and shallow as if they had given up and were now simply waiting to die. A few already had. God, those poor things. Shouldn't they have been euthanized? Maybe the sheer number of illnesses between the cows and staff made it so that the farm simply couldn't keep up. After having to pass by too many more starving, miserable cows, Iolo suddenly raised an arm to stop me in my tracks. He then curiously asked Wes, "Can you see it?" Wes admitted that he couldn't. Experimentally, he also checked through the hagstone. Once again, the hunger grass was indiscernible from the rest of the pasture to us both. The stone hadn't even vibrated in its presence. "How can we tell that this is really it?" Wes questioned. The mechanic smirked. "By all means, step forward if you don't believe me." I felt the need to remind them again. Not the time. First of all, we are trespassing, and second of all, something does not feel right here. Still holding on to that punchable smile, Iolo replied, "You are no fun today." Unbelievable. When I'm snarky, he bitches. When I'm trying to keep things under control, he still bitches. I can't fucking win. There was work that needed to be done. Without responding to him, I removed pieces of bread from the baggie, trying to think of the best way to sprinkle the crumbs. "Where specifically are the boundaries of the grass?" I asked. To my astonishment, the mechanic withdrew the fiddle's bow from its case, using it to draw a line in the snow-covered ground in front of me with a derisive snort. In a shocking turn of events, Iolo ap Hugh was actually being cooperative for once. In the dull grey winter mist, the bow appeared to be made of gold. Once the violin was removed, I saw the entire instrument in its opulent glory. Its gilded face was accentuated with an intricate laced pattern, a completely different design than the banjo. "I appreciate it," I muttered to him before dumping crumbs on the ground contained within the line he'd drawn. Without much banter, Wes and I worked together on that while Iolo started playing the instrument. At first I tensed up waiting for something to come of it. Nothing did, not that I could see anyways. The cows all watched him, some letting out deep moos as if trying to sing along. Some could call this a cow-cacophony. If you hate me for that one, I understand. There aren't many positives I can say for the mechanic. He is responsible for a lot of mental and physical scars, wounds that I'm confident will never fully fade away. But one of the few redeeming qualities that the huntsman has is that he bears an effortless talent when it comes to music, whether it's with the fiddle or the banjo. While the violin's notes came with the refined skill of a surgeon using a scalpel, his face remained relaxed as if such talent came as naturally as breathing to him. I'd learn afterwards that this song was intended to keep away human onlookers. The herd's serenade had unintentionally alerted the Rustic Acres employees to our invasion, but as soon as the mechanic's tune started, all was forgotten. Once the affected area was covered in a blanket of crumbs and pieces of torn-up whole wheat, I started watching the cows intently for any changes. If the records we'd found regarding these infestations were accurate, then it should have lifted the curse on them. However, the cows continued to gaze at us, the hollow sockets housing their gleaming eyes, making them appear more like a distant memory of cattle. The one closest to Wes had begun to drool, long strings dangling from its dirty mouth. "Hey, are these guys?" Wes started to ask. Before he finished, there was one sharp note from the fiddle and the snow was painted red. One by one, the heads of the herd rolled to the ground, eyes wide, tongues lolling limply from their wide mouths. Their bodies joined them, knees crumpling as if they were hoping that if they could rejoin their skulls in time, they could become connected once again. As I stared in speechless, wide-eyed horror, Iolo calmly said, "That shit you read about curses getting broken? Wishful thinking. Them cows were either gonna die a slow, painful death or they were gonna start fixing for something other than grass. You getting me?" I thought of the way that the cows had watched us, still, so still, salivating as if we were the tastiest things they'd ever seen in their lives. As stupid as it sounds, I hadn't considered the possibility that anything other than a human could become a hungry man-style revenant. Suffice to say, Orion's entries on the hunger grass will be getting a massive update once all of this is resolved. Wes turned on him. "You could have said something sooner." "Yeah, but would you fuckers have listened?" Iolo asked, completely unruffled as he carefully set the instrument back in its case. Number probably not. It wasn't that I thought the mechanic was being dishonest. If he was saying it, he at least believed that he was telling the truth. It's more that one of the core values of Orion is to resolve these infestations with as much compassion as possible. However, if there was absolutely no way to cure the hunger grass's sickness, then what he'd done was the most compassionate thing. Their bleak alternatives were either to continue wasting away until their bodies gave out, like those laying in the field I mentioned earlier, or wandering the earth in an eternal, primordial hunger. That led me to my next awful realization. If there was no hope for the cows, then there most likely wasn't any for the humans who've been cursed as well. Seeming to have read my mind, Iolo drew closer and murmured, "I'll take care of it. You and yours ain't any good to me on death row." I'd expected him to make some sort of comment about my father, to dig at that old wound with a smile on his face, nonchalantly telling me I'd be following in the sperm donor's footsteps, or perhaps that he'd thought that mass murder would come naturally to me. But it didn't happen. He seemed bound and determined to surprise me as much as possible that day. Naturally, I hated this outcome, not wanting to accept that there was no way we could help any of the afflicted. There had to be something we could do. I wasn't willing to just give up so easily. Regardless, we did our due diligence and doused the affected area in lighter fluid before setting it ablaze, sticking around afterwards to make sure the fire died without spreading elsewhere. If the breadcrumbs weren't sufficient to break the curse over the afflicted, then their ability to clear the infestation was doubtful. We couldn't afford to leave anything to chance. Wanting to update Victor on the situation, I gave him a call after I got back to the truck on our way to the next thicket. We left sweet-smelling smoke behind us, as well as the carnage. The mechanic didn't seem concerned about anyone finding either, considering that no one ever appeared to notice all of the times he'd left my apartment covered in blood. I figured that this would go the same way. It wouldn't get traced back to any of us as long as he didn't want it to. On the way to the next site, Wes questioned if anyone, such as some sort of government entity, would come sniffing around after all of these deaths. To tell the truth, I wasn't really concerned. Listeria outbreaks have been making headlines for the past year across the United States. What was yet another deadly foodborne outbreak, especially in a region like ours. No one gave a damn about the problems, atypical or otherwise, in Mercer County before the hunger grass. Why would they start now? When I called Victor, curiously, it went straight to voicemail. Either his phone was dead or he'd shut it off. I tried Deedra next. With how knowledgeable she is, there was always the slim chance she'd know some miraculous way to help the sick that the mechanic hadn't considered. It couldn't hurt to try. Because of this quality, she's found her niche at Orion as our secretary. Not only is she able to help many clients resolve atypical cases all on their own, she is also a lot better at dealing with the clients than anyone else. What does it say about my colleagues and me that a former weeper, who spent most of her existence trapped in a river, has better social skills than any of us? Probably nothing good. Of course, it also doesn't hurt that she has a devastatingly cute voice, but of course I'm objectively biased. Orion Pest Control, how may I assist you? Her spiel was so darling. The charming way that she rolls her R's was almost enough to distract me from the Category 5 shitstorm ripping up Mercer County. Almost. Grimly, I told her, the breadcrumb method didn't work. Her end of the phone got quiet for a moment as she processed the bad news. I continued, telling her about the cows, how the mechanic had put them out of their misery, and his intention to take care of the people who'd been affected. As she relayed everything I said to Raina, there was hushed commotion from the other end of the line. "All right," Deidre eventually muttered, sounding thoughtful. "You keep doing what you're doing, Nessa. Just focus on that. But once you're finished, if you can, try to distract the mechanic for as long as possible. Raina and I are going to see if there's anything we can do before having to resort to that." There was some muffled rustling, then Raina's voice was in my ear. "He only said that he didn't know if there's a way. That doesn't mean that it's impossible. I mean, I don't know if anything that I have will fix this, but that's not going to stop me from trying." I sighed with relief. "I was so hoping you'd say that. I believe in you." "Thanks, bestie," she replied, then jokingly added, "And I'm going to remember this incident the next time a certain someone tells me to go touch grass. You hear me, you blood-sucking bitch?" Wes had begun to snicker from beside me. That was a yes. The next hunger grass location was at one of the local beef farms. This time we didn't bother with the bread going straight to burning while Iolo gave the cows their last performance. Once again, we weren't bothered by anyone or anything. That struck me as odd. Where was the hungry man? Or the one who'd planted the grass in the first place? Not that I wanted a fight with either, but surely they'd have a problem with what we were doing. Once all was said and done there, Iolo informed us that there was only one more thicket to take care of. This patch of grass was located near the construction site the mechanic had mentioned. A sign out front boasted about their unwanted project, a cookie-cutter neighborhood that was going to be called the Avalon. The sign had been vandalized with red spray paint reading, "Get fucked," and a poorly drawn penis beneath it. Trees had been cleared out, leaving large piles of dug-up dirt by a freshly paved cul-de-sac. The houses were just beginning to be assembled, mere wooden skeletons set upon their foundations. When the mechanic got out of his truck, he pretended to be joking as he told Wes, "Hey, if you happen to drop some of that there lighter fluid on one of these houses and also just happen to drop a match, I might grant you a blessing." Wes gave the construction project a scornful look. Very tempting. Grinning wickedly, Iolo encouraged, "Nothing like a little arson to spice up an evening." I guess that's one way to distract the mechanic once we're done clearing up the grass. Disclaimer. If any law enforcement reads this, I was only kidding. I promise. 3. You two can commit all the crimes you want once we finish this, I said, sounding a bit too much like my mother for my own comfort. It gave me a minor crisis. Iolo clicked his tongue at me. "Dangerous words, Fiona. You say that as if you don't violate the Geneva Convention on a weekly basis," I retorted, following him as he began to lead us to the last spot. "Oh, a little torture builds some character. Take you, for example. You were fucking insufferable before all this, but now..." He paused, considering before he completed his thought with a chuckle. "Well, on second thought, you're still a pain in my arse." "Yeah, same to you, fucker." The final hunger grass infestation was located a few yards away from some construction equipment, left to sit in preparation to create lots for what was sure to be more soulless greige residences. Bitterly, I thought about how, if the Avalon was causing this much havoc before even a single house was fully assembled, Orion was going to be up to its neck in calls once people started moving in. That's how it went with the last suburb, after all. Yins may be wondering why all these houses are being built in a place that is so economically downtrodden. Simply put, the cost of living is cheap. A nice-sized house with a decent amount of land costs the same out here as it does to rent a bougie apartment in downtown Pittsburgh. And with the exception of the neighbors, it's a relatively safe place to raise a family. Once again, the mechanic used the bow of his violin to point out where Wes should pour the lighter fluid. While that was being taken care of, that was when I finally saw him. With how skinny and dirty he was, the hungry man had blended seamlessly into the trees. He stood with his clay bowl, simply watching, having to lean heavily against the birch beside him to keep from collapsing. As a precaution, I'd kept 2 slices in my pocket in the off chance that I touched the grass during this ordeal. Since we were almost done, I figured it couldn't hurt to spare one. Even while knowing that this offering wouldn't help to relieve his starvation, he just looked so weak. Feeling Iolo's eyes on me, I approached the hungry man slowly, holding one of the slices out to him. The hungry man held his bowl out with a shaking hand. Gingerly, I placed the bread inside, then quickly withdrew my hand. Fingers trembling violently, he reached within to begin picking at it. "I remember you from before," he grunted between bites, his voice hoarse. "Is this offering given on your behalf or someone else's?" Mine," I replied, then asked apprehensively, "Does the bread help at all?" The hungry man quickly finished the rest of his snack, replying, "Not in the way you would think." Politely, I asked, "Would you mind elaborating?" Throughout my damnation, I have grown to appreciate flavors like no other. He flashed his incongruously perfect teeth in a smile as he slumped against the tree once more. Haven't you noticed how even something as simple as a slice of bread tastes exquisite when you're ravenous? I never would have thought of it that way, I mused. Head lolling weakly on his neck, he languidly cast a look at Wes and the fiddle bastard. Following his gaze, I could see that both were waiting for me. Wes looked concerned, matchbook in hand, ready to intervene if the hungry man became aggressive. Meanwhile, Iolo was glaring at me impatiently. Cold, bony fingers wrapped around my wrist, startling me. Then the hungry man's other hand covered my eyes as he muttered, his voice echoing in a way that made it sound as if I were surrounded by an army of starving revenants. Through that cacophony, I distantly heard Wes, but couldn't make out what was being said. The hungry man's hands fell away limply as he released me, saying only, "Use it well." Before I could get my bearings and figure out what the fuck just happened, the match was lit, igniting the hunger grass. The smell of charred flesh soon followed as the hungry man began to burn along with the thicket. Absurdly, his eyelids shut as he tilted his chin up towards the sky with a joyous smile. I stepped back, bile rising in my throat at the sight and smell. As the flesh melted off of his bones, the hungry man breathed. Finally. He lit up like a candle, flames consuming every inch of his being as skin gave way to stringy muscles. The heat on my face was intense, a smoldering wall of blistering warmth. A hand on my shoulder pulled me away. Black cherries intermingled with the stench of incinerated flesh and hair made me dry heave. It took a moment for me to recover from it. My eyes watered on reflex as my stomach churned. The snow around the area had all melted, leaving a ring of wet brown grass around the hungry man's scorched bones. Black smoke rose from the remains. "What just happened? Are you all right?" Wes asked hurriedly. Between whatever the hungry man did and how quickly everything happened, I was disoriented as my mind struggled to keep up. I had a headache developing behind both eyes. My vision had gone strange. Iolo's shadow. It was different. Had he dropped his human act? When he forced me to face him, I saw that wasn't the case. While he still appeared as a man in front of me, hazel eyes scrutinizing me, I couldn't take my eyes off of his shadow. His wings and spikes were visible in that silhouette. "Okay, well that's new," I muttered. The mechanic had begun to chuckle as he glanced down to see what I was so fixated on. Well, I'll be damned. Now that I didn't feel like I was about to keel over, I became uncomfortably aware of his grip on my shoulder. I shrugged it off. Iolo let me, but shot me a withering glare. Still worried, Wes demanded, "You want to fill me in?" The mechanic looked annoyed at having to speak to him again, but he kept his tone neutral. Gave her the second sight. Means she can see shit she's not supposed to. Jesus Christ. Besides Iolo's shadow, everything around me looked normal. Wes's appearance hadn't changed. Since the grass had been incinerated, I couldn't see what was different about it. So, I'm going to start seeing weird shit. I rubbed my eyes, trying to work out the throbbing behind them. That's just fantastic. And I know someone is going to point out, "Nessa, that's a good thing." Hypothetically, yes. It's something that could be helpful in my profession. However, people have also gone mad from their glimpses behind the veil. There is a cost to the hungry man's gift. That, and it had just been a long day. And unfortunately, it was about to get longer. The mechanic started packing up his fiddle, informing us, "Well, now that that's all taken care of, as delightful as this has been, it's best we part ways." Wait. I didn't know if Raina or Deedra had a chance to find any miraculous treatments for the others plagued by grass sickness. We had to find some way to stall him. Wes and I exchanged yet another glance. He held up a hand towards the mechanic. "Hold on. We still haven't found what caused the grass in the first place." Closing the case with a snap, Iolo responded, "Well, She ain't gonna show herself while I'm here, so you'll have to come back later. Not wanting to have to deal with yet another lover's quarrel, I'm not sorry, Wes. I cut in. Who is this she? You familiar with the Wood Maidens, Fiona? No wonder this neighbour wouldn't show herself. Wood Maidens are neighbours normally found in Scandinavian countries, though they've been popping up around various forested areas around the US and other parts of the world. They are capable of changing their appearances, often disguising themselves as exceptionally beautiful young women, often using their looks to lure young men deep into the woods. They're also said to have been targeted by the Wild Hunt for some ancient slight that was committed so long ago that no one can recall what initiated this feud. Iolo continued, starting to wander back towards his truck. Personally, I don't give a flying fuck about 'em. That's more Woden's faction than ours. That don't stop 'em from being real skittish round us, though. Wait, what's that feud about? I asked quickly, hurrying after him. He shrugged, not stopping. Fuck if I know. Fuck if I care. Some wood girl probably wouldn't spread her legs for one of them. That made my lip curl in disgust. Classy. In a last-ditch attempt to keep him here, Wes decided to set yet another fire as he harshly called after the mechanic. Imagine that. A huntsman resorting to violence when a woman rejects him. That got the mechanic to stop walking. For a moment he just laughed, shaking his head. I knew what that sound meant. Not good. I tried to signal to Wes that this was an awful idea, but my gestures went unnoticed. Iolo half turned with his usual smile. Is that what she told you when you got hired on? No, I snapped, the headache becoming more intense as I became more stressed. I'm not involved with this whatsoever. Just telling you what I see. Wes argued calmly, but mainly what I see is yet another wild animal that's needed muzzled for a while. Iolo's laughter made me shiver. And you think you'll be the one to do it? You've been fixing for a rematch for a while, haven't you, bloodsucker? Without hesitation, Wes threw even more fuel onto the dumpster fire. If it weren't for your king showing up, at best you'd be wingless. At worst, you wouldn't be here right now. Is that right? The mechanic with a short, dark chuckle as he withdrew the violin from its case once again. I felt a bit rough. Still do. Unsure, I asked, Hey, if you two are going to kill each other, can I leave? I need to overdose on an entire bottle of Excedrin. That technically wasn't a lie, but what I truly intended was to try to find Raina and Deedra, figure out what was going on there. The mechanic side-eyed me. Yeah, go on ahead. You're not going to want to see this, Fiona. Wes handed me the keys without taking his eyes off of the mechanic. Before departing, I whispered to the mechanic to please not kill my colleague. He didn't react at all. When I left, there were gunshots and the sounds of fiddle behind me. I don't know what the outcome of that fight was yet. Raina isn't answering her phone. Still haven't heard from Vic. I'm heading towards the office. Maybe one of them left a note or some sort of clue about where they could be going. I'll keep Yins posted.